And welcome everybody to another edition of DoubleCrossed Radio. My name is Chuck Horton. I'm your host tonight. And we're coming to you live from sunny Southern Oregon. I just almost was late for the show tonight. We just had one of the most beautiful sunsets that I've ever, definitely a top 10 sunset in my lifetime. It was just gorgeous. The whole sky was crimson red for a time. And then as it started to fade out in the east, turned kind of a grayish pink, and it was still crimson in the west. It was just beautiful, just beautiful. Lasted for a long time. Anyway, today is October 8th. For those of you who are big fans, you might know this is my birthday. And thank you all for all your birthday wishes. It's very heartfelt, and I really appreciate that. It's nice to know that some people out there appreciate the work we do trying to keep America free. I think it's... we're winning the battle. We're winning the war. We're losing some of the battles, and that doesn't matter to me. I'm just not going to ever give in. I want to thank all the people who respond with birthday wishes today, and those who continue to support our page and all the things that we do. And I know so many people, we probably get a few people that are a little put off by some of the things we say from time to time, and that's okay too. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. And most of these are my ideas and my opinions. Sometimes they're borrowed from other people. But that's how it is. Tonight, I'm going to show, or to attempt to show, how civilization and human progress is marching forward despite every attempt by government and other civilizing, quote-unquote, civilizing institutions to stop or inhibit its growth and progress. This is probably something to be left for more like a 4 or 5 hour show. So if I'm a little brief on some things and you think we need to revisit it and talk in length more about it, I'd sure welcome any comments to our Facebook page. People have serious things they want to talk about like this. And I think this is really quite interesting. To be very truthful with you, the idea for this originated with none other than Jeffrey Tucker, who I admire very, very much. I was quite often when I work, I'll listen to podcasts or YouTube videos just to kind of keep something going on in the background so I don't get distracted from what I'm doing. But I find I can't listen to Jeffrey as much as some of the others because he has such interesting things to say. It proves to be distracting nonetheless. So I end up playing them over and over again, so I make sure I get the whole thing and don't miss any parts of it. And it was one of the things that I heard in one of the speeches that was recorded and is on YouTube from Jeffrey Tucker. It was pretty entertaining. It was pretty interesting about how the free market and the kind of march of civilization. While it goes faster at times and slower at times, it always seems to be marching forward. With very little retrenchment or retracement of advances. Almost all the progress that it makes is in spite of governments, not because of them. In fact, I can't think of anything the government's done to speed up the march of civilization. One of the things that all you socialists out there like to throw out in everybody's face is, what about the roads? Yeah, what about the roads? All the money that's siphoned off of the people who would otherwise make other choices what to do with that road have made it great advancements and pretty much saddled us with the car as our means of transportation. And I think it's possible that, and this is something that Drew used to bring up all the time, if it wasn't for all this money being siphoned off, that we'd all be driving around in air cars now like the Jetsons, and we'd be living in space colonies, and we'd be living under the ocean, and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. So it's don't fool yourself into thinking that your payment of taxes is contributing to civilization and mankind's advancements, because it isn't. It's the brake on the car being applied when the car is trying to go full blast forward. This is a brake being applied fully to slow it down as much as possible, but the car is slowly inching forward regardless of that. And every once in a while, the brake gives out for a brief period of time, and mankind lunges forward in a huge advance. And those moments, I hope to be alive for the next moment like that, when mankind's able to reach for the stars, or we're able to connect via the internet and share information without fear of being put in prison, or something even simpler, when we're able to freely choose what we will and won't put in our own body. And I know a lot of people don't do well with that freedom, and that's their problem, not mine. I don't think I should be forced to take vaccinations. I don't think I should be restricted from using medicinal marijuana if I want to. I don't think there's any moral right for either one of those actions. And certainly your natural rights to own your own body would preclude that you would have by owning your own body, you would have the right to put into your body whatever it is you like, or to keep from putting into your body whatever it is you don't like. Well, let's get on to the topic tonight, and don't spend a lot of time with just babble like this. As you look through human history, there's several instances where you can get clear evidence that society or governments are not acting in the best interests of their populations that they govern. A good example of this would be the subjects of the Ottoman Empire, which was one of the Ottoman Empire was one of the largest empires that the Earth had ever seen up until that time. It was, of course, the Ottoman Empire was in what's today known as Turkey, but it also spread throughout the Balkan Peninsula. It had taken over much of what had been the eastern portion of the Roman Empire, and it had spread west and a little south into a lot of the areas we call the Arab Peninsula. They mainly stayed a little bit in the northern end. They were far advanced from almost all their neighbors. They had brilliant military commanders. They had advanced weapons. They were pretty capable of defeating just about anybody. But then comes along this innovation. It was called the printing press. A guy named Gutenberg invented a way to print books very rapidly, so that they didn't have to be transcribed by hand. They could be printed and bound, and everybody could own a book. And just think how liberating this is. This is the first case of information being freely shared to people. I mean, well, freely, maybe some people had to pay a little bit for it, but once they had it, it was their information. They could own that information. Of course, one of the books that was, at least in Europe, one of the books that was widely printed and circulated was the Bible. And I think that had a very civilizing effect on much of Europe. It also had a very civilizing effect on the church. They are no longer able to get away with kind of lying to their parishioners about what was in the Bible. Because other people were able to read those words now themselves and have their own ideas about what they meant and their own interpretations, and could put them in a context that was maybe being left out of the messages being delivered to them in a church. So the printing press had huge impact on the advancement of human beings because they were able to share information. And information was able to progress from person to person much faster than it ever could before. It was able to be stored. And the libraries were not just for the people who were rich that could afford to have people transcribe things, or wasn't restricted only to the church. It was available to everybody. Well, the Ottoman Empire saw the printing press as a threat to them. What I mean by a threat is, I don't want to get too symbolic about this. It was a threat. They saw that this free exchange of information could lead people to question the actions and the laws that were enacted by the ruling class. And that these I don't want to say these. The population, then they might have this ability to circulate other ideas that might be conflicting with the ideas that the Ottomans wanted to be prevalent in their society, and they could lead to the downfall of their great empire that they had. And so they thought the best way to protect their empire was to exclude the printing press from its boundaries. They would not allow it inside, and they would sit there and watch the barbarians around their empire go into self-destruct mode as they adopted the printing press and were capable of being influenced by all the evil that could be perpetrated by that. Well, guess what happened? The Ottoman Empire, which had been way, way, way ahead, way, way, way ahead of the rest of the world, those around them. I'm not so sure they were ahead of China, but they were way ahead of the people they had contact with, maybe generations ahead, and that made them more or less invincible. But by turning their back on the printing press within one generation, they were as far behind everybody else around them as they were ahead of them before. And suddenly, all their wealth and all their power began to dissipate. And they started to have defeats in battle. One of the most famous defeats is the Battle of Vienna. And sometime, if you have the time, you should read about that battle. It's quite interesting. And if you ever get a chance to travel to Vienna, make sure you visit the old city, and you can see the tunnels that the Ottomans had dug that went underneath the walls that protected the city, and they tunneled underneath there, and they were placing explosive charges under the buildings that housed the leaders of that city. And they were getting ready they were probably 3 or 4 weeks away from blowing up much of the city, and then, proceeding westward, and I don't think anybody would have stopped them on their way to the Pacific Ocean. Excuse me, the Atlantic Ocean. I got my geography right today. And but they were stopped. They were stopped maybe partially because of a printing press, and not directly but indirectly, the printing press had enabled the rest of Europe, including Poland, which is really like a Polish-Lithuanian empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, which included now what is now part of southern Poland and stretched into the Ukraine, the Germanic nations, and that included Austria, and I think part of what would be today the Czech Republic, although part of that was included in the Austrian Empire. Anyway, these areas had advanced much faster than the Ottomans had during this time period, and they were able to defeat them in this battle. They were really a little bit lucky, a little bit brave and courageous, and took advantage of opportunity, but they won, and they sent the Ottomans just fleeing back to Turkey. And from that time, the empire, they kind of consolidated, and their empire began to shrink, and they lost a lot of real estate in the Balkan Peninsula. They eventually lost their standing in Greece. We've chronicled on this show the crunching defeat that unarmed Bulgarians were able to, I think it was 3,000 unarmed, well, they had arms initially, but they ran out of ammunition almost instantly. And without any other weapons, were able to defeat an army of 30,000 Turks or Ottomans at ship capacity in Bulgaria, which is just somebody ought to make a really good movie about this. This is one of the most stirring moments of human history. That an overwhelming force was defeated by basically people throwing sticks and stones at them. Anyway, it shrunk. The Russians came, now that they saw that there was defeat was in the air, the Russians came they were there helping the Bulgarians because they've always wanted a port to the Mediterranean. And they rushed in, and with the Bulgarians rushed them all the way back, all the Ottomans all the way back to the normal boundaries of Turkey, which is basically in Istanbul, which sits on the Bosphorus, the Bosphorus Straits, I believe it is, that drains the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. And that was it. That was the end of the empire. Then Ataturk became the new leader of Turkey, and he instituted all these reforms, including allowing a printing press, which I think had probably been done a few years before, but it took them the better part of 100 years to catch up to where the rest of the world was. In some ways, they haven't caught up yet. Once the greatest power on earth. And just because of government and religious intervention, they became a no-show, a third world power, a third world no power. And the people that lived there, that grew up and toiled there, they were neglected to third world status. They just, all their rich history and the culture that had been developed there was just pretty much abandoned because of the government's attempt to control society so much that it really threw away the advance or any chance of advancement as a society, because control was more important to them. We can also look at what happened in Columbus. Now, I bring up Columbus was really the person I intended to talk about today, because Monday is Columbus Day, and it's the day we celebrate Columbus, his voyage of discovery. And I'm not talking about Darwin, voyage of discovery. I'm talking about Columbus. He made several voyages to the New World. He brought a lot of settlers to the Caribbean. And you can go to almost any South American country, and you can see kind of the ripple effect from those 4 voyages that Columbus made. Even if he never ever set foot in that country or on that country's soil, the people he brought with him in those 4 voyages probably did, some of them, or their ancestors. And it spread throughout South America. Now, when they got there, this is something I wasn't aware of until I visited last year about this time. I visited Playa del Carmen in Mexico. I had a wonderful time there. Highly recommend that as a vacation. It's not terribly expensive there this time of year, and it's very beautiful weather. It's you might have a rainstorm or two, or you might not. It's got just really rich culture there and heritage. And one of the things I liked the best was our trip to Chichen Itza, which was a Mayan ruin. It's in the middle of the Yucatan Peninsula. It's kind of I won't go into all the details on it, other than the fact that it's pretty jaw-dropping to when you first turn on and see it and realize that this was all built by hand. You go and you look at the blocks that they quarried and carved, and they're cut with such precision you'd swear it was done by a machine, but it's not. And this is just an amazing accomplishment, and one that really signaled how advanced the Mayan culture was. Maybe it had slipped a bit since its heyday, and we're going to blame that on government, because government has that perchance to stifle or diminish any human advancement, because they want to control people. So it may have been kind of snuffed out in a retreat from its previous highs due to the actions of government and other controlling institutions or whatever the Mayan religions were. But the Spanish, when they got there, I don't think they really realized how great that culture had really been. They see these monuments, these really they're treasures of the modern world or the ancient world or whatever, but they immediately assumed that the people who were living there couldn't possibly have built these. They just didn't think they had the capabilities and the knowledge and the skills to do it. Someone built them. I think someone built them. Maybe their population flourished to such an extent that they overplanted their crops and reduced the fertility of their soil, so there wasn't enough nutrition, and that could have led to a downfall. Or it could have just been a government that was too restrictive, that caused people to just stop wanting to do more, because it was they were so controlled that wasn't a way to happiness and bliss. So anyway, I'm not trying to get too philosophical about something I know nothing about, because I wasn't there, and the history about that period is rather one person's guess. But it seems to me, as you look through human history, that seems to be the pattern of when things collapse. It's generally because of the ruling bodies that just become too oppressive, that it no longer can be sustained. And there's different kinds of oppression. But one of the things that really shocked me on this trip that we had, we went into a city in the Yucatan that was between Playa del Carmen and Chichen Itza, and the city was rather nice. It was the heavens opened up and it just rained like cats and dogs, and you can't believe how quickly the streets. I mean, Yucatan Peninsula is pretty flat. It's not very far above sea level. There's not a lot of places for water to run. It kind of sits there. Well, quickly the streets, being, the houses have drain pipes, and they all come down to the streets filled up with water. They were about, I would say maybe in some spots a foot of water in the streets, just instantly. It didn't take long at all. And so we weren't going to go anywhere for a while because everybody was wet, and the street was kind of hard to pass. So we were going to have a stop there anyway to look at some tourist shops and such. So my wife and I were walking around, and we started talking with some people from a different tour that were there. And one of those people was quite knowledgeable about this, and he's pointed out to this church. So this is a very old church. I said, wow, that really looks like it was really well built. Those stones. And it says, oh yeah, those are stones that the Spanish in this city, there used to be Mayan temples built here, and they took them all down and used those stones to build this church. And that's, as I did my research when I got back home, in city after city after city, this pattern was repeated. That in Merida, which is the capital of the region or the state that Chichen Itza's in. It's on the northern tip of that little part that sticks out on the Yucatan Peninsula. It sticks out into the Caribbean. And this city has the second oldest church in North America. The Americas north of Panama, or Panama and north. It's the second oldest church, and it was built almost entirely of stones. The whole city is built on top of what used to be a Mayan city, and they had taken all the Mayan temples down, reduced them to rubble, and used those stones to build this church. And it's quite an amazing church. I did not get a chance to visit this place. I would like to go back and see it. You can read about it online. There's stories about it. You can see pictures. But if you look at those stones are all stones they took out of the Mayan churches. Now, they did it because, why? They did it because they didn't have anybody that they had brought over from Europe that was talented enough to cut stones as precisely as these stones had been cut. So you just think about that for a second. I'm not sure there were that many stone cutters in Europe that could do this. I mean, there was obviously some. There were some great cathedrals being built there. This was in 1530 or something like that, and this church was built. There weren't a lot, I'll put it that way. There were a few. But you go to every one of these Mayan ruins, and they were all cut like that. A lot of people in the Mayan civilization at one time knew how to cut stones like that. They knew how to keep them square. Well, that's an amazing thing that just, when it dawned on me, is how far ahead of Europe the Mayan civilization had been at one time, and how sad it was that that progress that they had been making was thwarted, and they had sunk back and fallen behind the Europeans who conquered them. If the Europeans had arrived maybe 300 years earlier, they'd been massacred probably when they tried to steal stuff or take stuff from them. They would have been technologically unable to compete. But just like the Ottomans had done, the Mayans had destroyed their civilization through, and it's my opinion, by wanting to control them more than wanting to go forward. And that control eliminated their advancement, enabled them to be conquered by an inferior people, I believe, or an inferior culture, if nothing else. I think all humans are equal. I don't want to get into it. I think that one person's better than another, but individually you could probably make claims like that, but as a population, as a group, I don't know. That's probably not valid. There's probably no way to prove that, no way to measure it. But I don't think that even if there was, I don't think it would show that one people are greater than another. I think that the potential that lies within the human genome is there, and it is realized the best when that genome, that human population, is allowed to be free. And that's what was missing in the Ottoman Empire, and I think that's what was missing in the Mayan culture. We can go back further to the Roman Empire. We talked about that recently, about how the Romans, they had overthrown their king, and they were just a city-state at that time, and they'd overthrown their king because his son had raped one of the nobleman's wives, and they ran him out of town, and they decided that they could rule themselves. That was a Greek idea, and many of these nobles had been educated in Greece, but no one had really tried it out very well the way the Romans did. The Romans had really the first real republic. And while they were free in a republic, their empire grew and grew and grew. As we noted on the show when we talked about this, it wasn't perfect, but at one point, this is when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, which we posted a story about that Simon Black had today. America has crossed the Rubicon. I think he's right. But when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he invaded his own city-state with his army. So the Romans were invading Rome, and they no longer were a republic. They became an empire at that point. And that empire, in order to grow and to be real, had to use force and coercion to control its society. And the growth of Rome slowed and slowed and slowed until barbarians from the north were able to defeat them, till they were able to bring elephants from Africa Hannibal brought elephants from Africa to go across the Alps and to come down from northern Italy and to fight them on the battlefields with elephants. And the western half of the Roman Empire was lost. Rome was sacked something like 11 times by different tribes of Europeans. Excuse me. And the Eastern Empire still was maintained, and that was at Constantinople, which later became Istanbul. And the Eastern Empire was eventually became the Ottoman Empire. But as you can see, they didn't learn anything from the Romans. And even though neither party was able to take any solace from what happened from the Mayans and learn from them, because that was just too far away and there wasn't the communications available to it, I believe it's the same story that's played out. I mean, it just seems like this is something that happens over and over and over again. When Marco Polo first went to China, China was so far ahead of Europe, it wasn't even funny. I mean, the things he brought back in his trade routes would just bring a fortune to people because they were so fine. The fine silks, the carvings, the jade carvings, the different things that they had done, the gunpowder, they invented gunpowder. They were really way, way ahead of Europe. But they were a very restrictive society. They were way ahead of Europe, 1,000 years before Europe started to arise. But China had slowed its development and growth, and Europe just went right past them. Suddenly, China was being more or less taken over by England, and they actually took control of China by introducing opium and using drugs to gain control of the privileged class in China and take over the country. And they were about ready to be driven out when they decided they didn't really want the country. They would just settle for this little tiny rock out in this harbor called Hong Kong. And so they settled for a 100-year lease on Hong Kong, which just expired about 20 years ago. So Hong Kong has been reverted to China's rule for only about 20 years. Before that, it was part of the holdings of the English Crown. But I just see, if I had more time, I could go and I could tell you more stories of civilizations where the absolute control or the will of the ruling elites to control their subjects has led to the fall of that empire or civilization or whatever. And let's fast forward to today in America. We live in an age that people 100 years ago couldn't have even fathomed. Here we live in an age where you can talk via video Skype to anyone you want that has the same technology in their house anywhere around the world. Now, that's one of the ways that my wife and I were able to decide we really liked each other, and we'd spend hours talking with each other. In fact, to tell you the truth, even today when she goes back to Poland to visit her family, we probably spend more time talking to each other and they live halfway around the world. They live in a time zone that's 9, 10, 11, 12 hours different than yours. And that, to me, was just incredible. And I have lots of internet friends I talk to on Skype. I've introduced one of them to our audience a few weeks ago. She lives in China. I know her as Jane, but I don't think that's her name. That's her American name. But she's has a family, husband, and a child, and she has a life in China, and she's just a real interesting person. She wanted to be a teacher of English, and so she studied English very diligently because she wanted to teach English in the schools there. So she actually speaks English better than most of the people in the town where I live. She's really good grammar, pronounces her words properly. She has a very big vocabulary. It was really easy for me to talk to her and ask her questions, and some things are kind of personal. She kind of pretends like she doesn't know. I apologize, and that's how things are. She's a wonderful friend. We've gone years without talking to each other, and then by chance be on Skype at the same time, and we'll exchange "Hi, how are you?" and then set up a time when we could catch up with each other's lives for a brief time. I have a friend in Thailand. There's a lawyer there. I have a friend in I don't want to get started into a brag contest, but I have friends from the United States who have moved to Chile. They've been on our show. Gabriel Scher and Travis Boyd, I believe, is there, along with Gary something. I forgot Gary's last name. I'm sorry, Gary. I talked with them. We've talked with James Guzman, who's down in San Miguel de Allende via Skype. And we didn't do it with the video because that was part of the radio show, but we could. In fact, I think he has a better internet connection than we have here. But the point is that we're advancing very quickly, and we have the thing that the internet has given us. This kind of advancement wasn't possible since before the time of the printing press. This great technological advantage is that now we're able to share information all the way around the world almost instantaneously if we want to. And being able to share something, a small advancement with 6 billion people, means there's a greater chance that someone will take that small advancement and make another advancement. There used to be a show on PBS was called Connections, and they would start with a modern-day technological advancement or whatever, and the host would take you back through time and show how one invention after another had led up to the present day, and he'd take you all the way back to what he considered to be the beginning. It was a really, really interesting show. If any of you, I'm sure that there's YouTube episodes of those all over the place, and revisit some of those. They're very interesting, but it shows you how there's just some really unlikely connections between one advancement and another one, and then those two come together, and all of a sudden there's this huge step forward. Well, now that communication is possible virtually anywhere, to anyone and anywhere, all the way around the world, the record pace of advancement, discovery, and progress is going faster than ever. And our country is trying its darndest to gain control of the situation by enacting draconian legislations like SOPA, which was defeated, yet many of the provisions of SOPA, which were just horrendous and very draconian, have been enacted by bureaucratic dictate. They really weren't passed through Congress or anything else. They wrote a bureaucratic rule, and it has the effect of law, and so they're able to selectively enforce these regulations to crack down on people that they think are dissidents or who don't have maybe they're these bureaucrats are being influenced by people that think that they can make money on this quote unquote intellectual property when they're not the only people that ever thought of that. They just happen to be the ones that claimed it. And they may not even be the first. They just claimed it first. And it doesn't mean that you can't think of something that does the same thing that is built slightly different. Maybe it might be an improvement even. But the people that are sharing things are seeing advancements go much further. It's right now we have a lot of stuff that's being put out there. It's been developed by DARPA, and they've given a lot of this technology to like phone companies and computer makers with this one condition, that this technology that they're giving them, which gives everybody better computers, better phones, iPads, and all this sort of stuff. This technology then also allows them to spy on people, to control people, to manipulate their behaviors, to use their behaviors against them. They can sell that information to marketers. And I think I've told you that the first time I visited Poland with my iPad, I went over there and I decided I would look up, see what I was able to log into a network there, and I got on and I play Scrabble with one of my Facebook friends, Corey in Buffalo, and I think we were playing a Scrabble game, and after every move a little ad would come up, as I've since purchased the no ad version, but the first ad that came up was in Polish, and I said, how the heck well, of course I have a Polish IP address. But now they're a lot more sophisticated about how they spy, and I'm sure that they would know before I was going to Poland that I was going to be traveling there, and they would start those advertisements would start coming up for, while you're in Poland, stay here, be sure and visit this restaurant, and enjoy your stay, or make sure that you visit here, or whatever. And those are rather they're rather benign intrusions into our lives. But what about if our government becomes corrupted a little bit and we speak out against that government? And the people that speak out, their words are recorded on their smart devices that have these little microphones built into them so they can hear what you're saying even when it's turned off. And suddenly there's a movement to maybe overthrow this leader, or maybe have him impeached or something, and people start being arrested and detained without warrants and put away in undisclosed locations for an indeterminate amount of time with no access to legal counseling, and nobody in their family is notified as to the fact they've even been arrested, or even if they are alive. Well, those kinds of things happen in third world banana republics, and they're about ready to start happening in the United States. As Simon Blank stated in his column, and he was talking more about financial matters, but we've crossed the Rubicon in a lot of ways. Our Constitution was written, didn't allow for any of these things to happen, yet somehow we've seen our way to get court rulings that have the effect of a legislative law when they're never intended to do that. They're just the opinion of 7 men. And these people, if you can get the right people in there, they can do all sorts of harm to our freedoms. And they have. By and large, they have. One of these people was a former ACLU attorney, and I always thought I had a little bit of respect for the ACLU because I thought they were standing up for civil liberties of Americans. But her voting record since she's been on the court has told me that the ACLU had nothing to do with that. If anything, they might have been a subversive organization out there to undermine. They're trying to use the freedoms that the United States had against them to allow dissidents like themselves, dissident organizations, to flourish under the pretense that they were supporting freedom, when in fact they were setting up a system where they could have basically like a prison state. And coming to that,
we do, in fact, have the largest incarcerated population in the world, both in percentage of our populations incarcerated and total numbers. That's just an astounding statistic. What a waste of productive people. All right, and these people added to the 94 million, I believe it is now, 94 million Americans that aren't working. It's just a huge drain on our society. And this drain is slowing and even stopping our advancement as a human society. We are no longer the leader of the world. We've quoted to you about different polls that talk about the best economies in the world. The United States is not in. If you take out they always rig the polls that make the United States look better than a lot of places because they put so much emphasis on the Second Amendment and how effective that is. But you can tell right now that Second Amendment is under attack. And if you take that out of the equation, we are not even in the top 40 in terms of economic freedom in this country. We are the most overtaxed populations in what I would call the industrialized former free world. There are some people that live in places like Venezuela where they're taxed at much higher rates than we are, but Venezuela's they're about finished. Anyway, so if we look back in history and we look at these empires that have fallen, like the Mayans, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, they fell because their governments restricted the freedoms of their residents, their population, their society, and they stopped advancing. But the whole world wasn't ruled by just one empire, only the portion that it had control over. And so the rest of the world was able to catch up and pass and defeat them, and progress marches on. So a bunch of these elitist people that always seem to crowd their way to the top because they don't want to work for a living, they want to steal from other people who do work for a living. I think a while back, maybe a little over 100 years ago, they got this idea that, they're not immune to history. They see what's happened before, and they say, one way we could stop this is if we had a world government that kept the whole world from advancing. We could control the whole world, then nobody would ever be able to be vanquished because if the whole world was held at the same state of readiness or same state of advancement, then we could control it at that point. We would be able to control it for infinity, on into infinity. I think that was their idea, and I think they kind of drink their own Kool-Aid. They kind of believed it was really good for humanity to do this because they're the wisest and they should be in control. And they always rationalize their insane programs this way. It's almost comical. They think that they're smarter and they're more moral and they're outside the boundaries of law because they're such great people. The truth is, a lot of them are inbred. They have a lot of retardation in their bloodlines, and because they intermarry so much, they're just like just a bunch of toothless people from Appalachia who've married their cousins in a sense. Because there's such a small number of them, they really don't have the biodiversity needed to have a healthy genetic pool. So, what I'm saying is, I think that we're approaching that time where civilization is going to really slow down, almost stop its advancement, and at least the civilization that we know in the United States. And when that happens, you have to know that civilization isn't going to stop everywhere else around the world. There are going to be places where freedom is going to be triumphed, and they might be small at first, but they will grow rapidly because they will develop through their means of using technologies that are available right today that are being, our ability to use these technologies is being severely restricted And we're not quite as bad as China in the way we censor things, but we're getting there real close, real fast. And I don't know anybody that thinks China is a free society. And as we continue to go here, we're going to see that these other enclaves of freedom, and I don't know where they're going to be. I hope that I happen to land in one, and I live long enough to see freedom return to the North American continent, to my country, to my ancestors that haven't even been born yet. You call that ancestors? Well, my lineage that hasn't even been born yet. I don't know exactly the right word for that, but my ancestors are the ones that came before me. It'd be my. But I hope that my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and the generations that haven't been born yet are going to be able to enjoy freedom before their lives are snuffed out by time. And I refuse to let that flame of liberty go out on my watch. And I'm not going to give my life in a lost cause. And I say that because we are, in the United States, we are horribly outgunned by our government. And until we have enough people convinced of the moral superiority of freedom and the fact that we are not out to kill people and to control their lives, we just want everybody to be left alone. Until we can convince people of that, America is not going to be a safe place to live if you believe in freedom. And you're going to have more like 30% of the population on your side before you can have that kind of change enacted. Right now, I estimate it's more like 3%. And there's a lot of people out there that they give good lip service to being free and all this stuff, but when it comes down to I don't know, I don't know about not taking that drug because you say it's bad for you. The FDA approved it. I don't know. Those vaccinations they're good for us. They keep us from getting sick. And just because a bunch of them that took that vaccination a few years ago end up getting cancer doesn't mean that these are bad, does it? And it's not so bad, paying taxes just because our government uses that money to kill innocent people in a hospital in Syria. That shouldn't be a reason for us to be ashamed of paying our taxes. The fact that 22 people burned to death in their beds, that shouldn't be something I'm ashamed of, should it? Well, I'm ashamed of it. And I don't think there's enough people that feel the way I feel in this country to fight a war or to fight for freedom. We were way outnumbered and we're way outgunned. So I prefer to go somewhere else where the freedom will be respected, maybe an enclave of freedom somewhere where I can help to build that enclave into something that maybe can replace the decaying shell that is now surrounds the United States. Can someday interject freedom back into that society and free a bunch of people that didn't know that they were slaves. Much like Harriet Tubman freed people on the Underground Railroad, many of whom didn't even realize before they met her that they were slaves. During the days of communism, the United States used to sponsor a radio network called Radio Free Europe, and would broadcast shows into the Iron Curtain countries, including Poland, where my wife is from. And they would be shows that would talk about freedom-oriented subjects. But one of the things that always struck me as odd is these programs were never broadcast in the United States. And later, after reading a couple transcripts, I realized, wow, this was pretty powerful stuff. It was all true, and it was very enlightening, but this broadcast to the United States would further erode control the government had over the people here. People start questioning the government here because it was speaking to things that we should be aware of and many people weren't. With the internet, it should be easy to broadcast into people's homes all the way around the world this message of freedom, message of hope, message of natural rights, messages that are truths that have been known since man began to be able to put down his ideas on paper or carve it into stone. These truths haven't changed in thousands of years, and yet we ignore them at our peril. And all you have to do is look back in history, as I've done tonight, and you can find your own examples where governments became oppressive, restrictive, concealed the truth from their citizens, almost stopped progress in their nations, and were just crushed by the progress of their surrounding neighbors where freedom flourished. And they weren't always crushed in battle. Sometimes they were just crushed because people in those countries couldn't wait to get out. The truth leaked in. They saw that those people in other countries were doing better than they were doing, and they wanted out. And when they left, the balloon collapsed. It wasn't always in a war that they were destroyed. Well, I can see that I'm running out of time for tonight. And I just hope that this message reached a lot of your ears and it made you think. And you don't have to agree with me, but I would hope that if you disagree with me, you go and do some of your own research and see if I'm not right about some of these things in history, and see if some of these things don't match up with the things that are happening today in the United States. And I want you all to know that the people that came and settled this country came from places that were oppressed. And they left those places and came here because it was an enclave where freedom could grow and be nurtured. And for a while, this was a wonderful place for the whole world. This was the shining city on the hill. It did exist that way for a while. And so leaving to go and set up a freedom enclave somewhere else is not a dishonorable thing. It's the best thing you could do if you want to help America. And so my hat is off to people like James Guzman and Gabriel Scheer and Travis Boyd. Those people have the courage to take freedom to a place where it can flourish. And some of them aren't in very, in absolutely free places, but they are places where the government is so corrupt it doesn't really have control over people like it has here. And so there's no dishonor in doing that. I don't want any of you to stop your plans or to continue paying your taxes to support these war crimes of this country, because you think it's an embarrassment to leave. It's not somehow unpatriotic. No, real patriotism comes from supporting the ideas of liberty and freedom and justice, property rights. So that's all I had for tonight. I'm going to sign off, and I think I don't hear any music yet, but it's going to be coming on soon. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Jules, for this chance to come to you people every week on Thursday night. And there's the music. We'll see you next Thursday. Thank you, Jeffrey Tucker, for your inspiration for tonight's show. Good night, everybody.
You're bound to break.